My name is Elena Marlowe, and I was 30 years old when I learned that humiliation does not always arrive with shouting, chaos, or dramatic warning. Sometimes it arrives quietly, while you are already wearing the dress, holding the bouquet, and trying to convince yourself that the man you are about to marry is only late. I was locked inside the bridal suite at the Larkmont Glasshouse, a wedding venue overlooking Lake Michigan, with my gown fitted so perfectly I could barely breathe, and 200 guests waiting downstairs for a ceremony that should have started almost 2 hours earlier. The schedule had been adjusted twice, the staff had stopped making eye contact, and every explanation sounded more fragile than the last. At first, everyone tried to make it reasonable because people do that when the truth is too cruel to touch. Maybe Julian was stuck in traffic. Maybe his phone died. Maybe there had been a medical emergency. Maybe the Westcotts had been delayed by some private driver issue or rich family security problem nobody thought to explain to the bride. I wanted to believe any of it because believing an excuse was easier than standing there in white satin and accepting that the person who had promised to meet me at the end of the aisle might have chosen not to come at all. But after the first hour, hope started feeling foolish, and after the second, every comforting word felt like makeup over a wound still bleeding. Then I heard something from the hallway that made the air change in my body. It was not just Julian. The groom's side of the venue was nearly empty. His parents were gone, his cousins were gone, the business partners his mother had insisted we invite were gone, and most of his friends had either disappeared or stopped answering their phones. A few people from his side who had arrived early had quietly slipped out through a side entrance, leaving rows of empty chairs like a message nobody had the courage to deliver to my face. My sister, Tessa, paced near the vanity with 2 phones, calling numbers, refreshing messages, and getting angrier every time another call went unanswered. My mother, Caroline, was in the hallway with wedding planner Maribel, speaking in that careful voice people use when they are trying not to fall apart in public. I stood in front of the mirror and stared at a bride who looked like a stranger because I could already imagine the story people would tell by Monday morning. No groom leaves a woman at the altar for no reason. She must have done something. He must have found something out. Then my father, Martin, walked in. He looked like he had aged 10 years in 10 minutes, and before he said anything, I knew the excuses were over. He closed the door behind him, looked at me, and said, "Elena, sweetheart, Julian is not late. His family confirmed they are not coming." For a few seconds after my father said those words, I did not understand them as language. I understood his face first, then my mother's silence in the hallway, then Tessa standing too still with both phones. Martin told me Julian's mother, Vivian Westcott, had called from a blocked number. Not Julian, not his father, not anyone with enough decency to face the damage. Vivian had not asked whether I was safe or whether my parents were managing guests. She had simply said, "The Westcott family will not be participating today. We will discuss reimbursement once emotions settle." Reimbursement. That word cut through the numbness. Not apology, not shame. Reimbursement, as if my wedding were a canceled contract, as if the dress on my body, the guests downstairs, my father's handmade arch, and the life I was entering could be reduced to a number on an invoice. To Vivian, my public destruction was an accounting problem. Then Tessa held out one of her phones. One of Julian's groomsmen had accidentally texted her instead of Julian's cousin, and the message sat on the screen like proof dropped by a careless criminal. "Wheels up after midnight. Julian's with Sienna. Vivian says keep the bride calm until guests clear." I read it 3 times because my mind kept rejecting what my eyes understood. Julian had not woken up confused. He had not panicked. He had not been trapped in traffic. He had left Chicago on a company jet after midnight. The night before, he had called from his suite. He told me he loved me. He said he could not wait to see me at the end of the aisle. I had gone to sleep with my engagement ring pressed against my chest like a promise I could hold while he was boarding a jet with another woman, and I knew her name. Sienna Rhodes was not a stranger. She was the influencer hired for the Westcott family's resort launch, with perfect hair, easy laughter, and the kind of confidence rich men mistake for understanding. I remembered her hand resting on Julian's sleeve too long at the campaign dinner. I remembered him smiling at his phone after her messages. I remembered asking one careful question and watching him become offended before I had even accused him. Vivian once told me women like Sienna understood their world. Julian told me I was making myself look insecure. The worst part was that I apologized. I hated that he betrayed me, but I hated something else more. Some part of me had known. I had seen the way he looked at her, and instead of trusting myself, I apologized for noticing. Then Maribel stepped into the room. Guests were asking questions. Some were posting photos. One caption said, "Beautiful venue, but where is the groom's family?" Another said, "Something is definitely wrong at the Westcott wedding." My humiliation was leaving the building before I did. By Monday morning, it could reach clients, investors, private clubs, and every room where my name still had to sound professional. Then Maribel lowered her voice and said a Westcott relative had told someone downstairs the delay was because I was having an emotional episode. That was when I understood. They were not just leaving me, they were already blaming me. For a moment, nobody moved after Maribel said it. I could feel the meaning spreading through the room. Julian was gone, Vivian was hiding behind blocked numbers, and the first story being carried downstairs was that I had become unstable. My father recovered first because fathers sometimes mistake action for control when daughters are hurting. He said he could announce a private emergency. My mother, Caroline, suggested we say Julian had become ill because illness sounded cleaner than abandonment and would stop cruel questions. Maribel, trying to do her job, said dinner could be served early, the ballroom could be closed, and guests could be escorted out before whispers turned permanent. I knew they were trying to protect me, but every option felt like another blanket laid over Julian's cowardice. If we said he was sick, he would get sympathy. If we said there was a private family matter, he would get privacy. If we cleared the room quietly, he would get silence. I would get the aftermath. I would get the looks, the theories, the polite little pauses before people said my name. I would become the woman everyone assumed had done something so terrible that a groom had no choice but to run. Then I looked at my father's hands. They were shaking. That almost broke me more than the missing groom. Martin Marlowe had built the walnut wedding arch himself, sanding it after closing, sealing it on weekends, carving initials into the underside, because he said no daughter of his should stand in a rented room without something made by love. That arch was waiting beneath flowers and empty chairs, and suddenly I understood Julian had not only humiliated me, he had humiliated everyone who loved me enough to show up. I turned back to the mirror and saw a bride with nowhere to go, a woman dressed for a future that had left the city before sunrise. My voice came out lower than I expected. He did not just leave me. He left me here for them to watch. The room went silent because there was no comforting answer to something everyone knew was true. Tessa's face changed first. Rage did what shock had not. She wanted to call Julian, Vivian, Sienna, every groomsman, every relative, every person who thought my silence was guaranteed. She wanted to expose them before they could breathe. I told her, not yet, even though I did not know what yet meant. I was still too numb to plan revenge, but something inside me had gone cold and clear. I was no longer asking why Julian left. I was asking why he wanted me to find out like this. Then someone knocked. Tessa snapped. "Unless you found the groom in a ditch, go away." The door opened anyway, and Adrian Vale stepped inside in a black tuxedo, looking at me with steadiness instead of pity. "Elena," he said, "do you want this day to end with them deciding what it meant?" Adrian Vale was the last person I expected to see in that room. He was my boss, the founder of Vale and Hart Interiors, the man whose name could quiet a boardroom, and he was wearing a black tuxedo because he had been invited as a guest. For one humiliating second, all I could think was that he was seeing me abandoned, trembling, trapped inside a wedding dress that had become too heavy. But Adrian did not look at me like I was ruined. He looked at me like I was still standing. My father stepped forward before Adrian could come closer. Martin was protective in the way good fathers become when someone has wounded their child, and Tessa crossed her arms like she was ready to throw him out if he said one wrong word. My mother looked confused because Adrian did not belong to our family, yet he had walked into the most private disaster we had ever had. He looked at my father and said, "Give me 2 minutes with Elena." Martin asked why, and Adrian answered without taking his eyes off me. "Because every person downstairs is waiting to decide what this day means. The only person who should decide that is Elena." That sentence reached me before I had time to defend myself from it. All afternoon, people had been trying to manage the crisis, the guests, the Westcotts, and the rumors, but no one had said the day still belonged to me. Adrian came closer, stopping far enough away that I could breathe. He said I had choices. I could cancel everything, and he would help my father and Maribel clear the venue. I could walk downstairs and tell the truth, and he would stand beside me while I did it. Or I could walk down the aisle anyway, not as a legal wedding, not as a trick, not as a desperate replacement for what Julian had destroyed, but as a symbolic ceremony where Adrian stood in the place Julian abandoned. I stared at him and said, "There is no groom." Adrian's face did not change. "No," he said. "There is no Julian. That is not the same thing as you being alone. Same thing as..." Before anyone could misunderstand, he made the boundaries clear. He was not asking to marry me legally. The license had Julian's name on it, and nothing signed would be valid. He would not pretend this was romance if what I needed was survival. He would not touch me unless I chose it. He would not use my pain as an opening. "I can stand beside you in front of that room," he said. "Not to claim you, but to make sure the last image they remember is not you disappearing because Julian was a coward." Father Daniel Reeves was brought in, and he confirmed every word. There could be no legal marriage, only a symbolic blessing. And he would make the language clear. I thought about Julian in Aspen with Sienna, about Vivian saying reimbursement, about 200 guests waiting to watch me vanish. Then I said, "If I do this, I am not doing it to pretend he did not hurt me." Adrian nodded. "Good." I swallowed. "I am doing it because he does not get to turn me into a whisper." Adrian removed a silver ring from a chain around his neck and said it had belonged to his father. Only if I wanted something to hold. I touched it and my hands steadied. Then I turned to Maribel and said, "Tell them the ceremony starts in 20 minutes. Maribel did not give anyone time to fall apart. The moment I said the ceremony would start in 20 minutes, she became terrifyingly calm. She sent assistants to move flowers over the emptiest rows, told ushers to seat guests, adjusted the program, and warned staff not to answer questions about Julian or Vivian. Tessa stood in front of me with a tissue and my lipstick, fixing my face as if preparing me for battle, not marriage. Then she whispered, "If Julian ever comes within 10 feet of you again, I am choosing violence, and you are choosing bail." My mother laughed through tears, and that laugh gave me the first real breath I had taken all day. When it was time, my father offered me his arm. Martin's hand was still shaking, and that nearly undid me. The man who believed anything broken could be repaired if someone patient enough held the pieces correctly. I covered his hand with mine and said, "Dad, I am okay." He looked at me like he loved me too much to accept that lie. "Not yet," he whispered, "but you will be." I carried those words when the doors opened and every face turned toward me. The aisle looked longer than it had during rehearsal. Some guests smiled because the bride had appeared. Some looked confused because Julian had not. Some glanced toward the flowers where his family should have been. For 3 steps, shame pressed so hard against my chest that I almost stopped. Then I saw Adrian beneath the walnut arch my father had built. He was not pretending to be Julian, not performing, not smiling like he had won anything. He was simply there, steady enough for me to keep moving. That was when shame changed shape. It did not vanish. First it became anger, then focus, then something close to power. Every step became a refusal. I refused to disappear. I refused to protect Julian from the truth. I refused to let Vivian's version of me become the only one people remembered. When my father placed my hand in Adrian's, he said, "Do not make me regret trusting you with what is left of this day." Adrian answered, "I will protect her choice. I will not claim it." Julian had treated me like an accessory to his image. Adrian treated me like a woman who still owned her life. Father Daniel began carefully. "Dear friends and family, today has not unfolded according to expectation. But love is not proven by perfect plans. Love is proven by presence, by courage, and by the willingness to stand beside someone when walking away would be easier." They did not know everything, but they knew enough. Adrian looked at me, not the audience. "Elena, I cannot undo the pain this day has brought you. I cannot erase the empty chairs, the silence, or the betrayal before this moment. But I can promise this. As long as you allow me to stand beside you, you will never have to believe you were left because you were not enough. You were enough before anyone chose you. You are enough after someone leaves." I cried then, but I did not feel weak. I had no vows for Adrian, only vows written for a man who did not deserve them. So I told the truth. I came here believing love meant keeping a promise no matter who was watching. Today, I learned some people love their image more than their word. But I also learned dignity can survive betrayal when someone reminds you your life is not over because someone else was too selfish to stay. I do not know what tomorrow looks like, but today I choose to stand. Before Adrian placed his father's ring on my finger, he whispered, "Is this okay?" I said yes. The ring was too large, so I curled my hand to keep it from falling. I gave him the band meant for Julian, and he accepted it as witness, not ownership. Father Daniel did not call us husband and wife. He said, "Let this moment be remembered not for the betrayal that tried to define it, but for the courage that answered it. You may seal this vow if both of you choose." Adrian stopped before touching me. "Your choice," he whispered. "Yes," I said. The kiss was supposed to be symbolic. It was not. When we turned to face the room, I expected pity, but what I saw was respect. The reception should have felt fake after that. It should have felt like a performance everyone had agreed to continue because canceling would have been more awkward than pretending. Instead, it felt surreal, something I have trouble explaining. People came toward me carefully, as if I were cracked but not broken, and the kindness in their faces hurt almost as much as the betrayal. Some hugged me longer than usual. Some avoided Julian's name. Some leaned close and whispered, "You were incredible." Like saying it louder might make me collapse. Others squeezed my hand, and somehow those quiet gestures said more than speeches could have. The room was full of people trying to understand how they had arrived for a wedding and witnessed something closer to a public resurrection. I was still wearing the dress. The flowers were still on the tables. Dinner was still being served. But nothing meant what it had meant that morning. The empty chairs were covered, yet everybody knew what they were covering. Maribel refused to let disaster take the night. When she signaled for the first dance, I almost told her no because there was a limit to how much symbolism one woman should survive. Then Adrian offered his hand and said, "Only if you want to." I looked around at the cameras, the flowers hiding the emptiest rows, my mother standing with one hand pressed to her chest, and my father watching like I might vanish if he blinked. I placed my hand in Adrian's and said, "I want to finish what I started." We danced slowly, not like lovers yet, but not like strangers either. Halfway through, Adrian said, "Breathe, Elena. You made it through the worst part." I looked up and asked, "Did I?" His expression changed because he understood. "No," he said softly. "But you will not face the rest of it alone unless you choose to." During dinner, my father stood with his glass raised, and the room quieted around him. "I have spent my life building furniture because wood tells the truth," he said. "If it is weak, it splits. If it is strong, it holds. Today I learned people are the same. Some split under pressure. Some hold." He looked at me, then at Adrian. "To the people who hold." Everyone stood. I saw Julian's business contacts avoiding each other's eyes. I saw women from Vivian's circle whispering into their phones. I did not feel joy, but I felt the beginning of justice. In the background, Tessa kept the groomsman's accidental text. Maribel preserved the ceremony timeline. My father saved Vivian's blocked call log. A venue manager noted which Westcott guests had slipped through the side entrance. It did not feel like evidence yet. It felt like people refusing to let the truth disappear. Adrian stayed beside me, but never claimed the moment. When a guest said, "You rescued her," he answered, "No, she chose to stand. I was only allowed to stand beside her." Near the end, he asked if I wanted air. On the terrace, he placed his jacket around my shoulders. I almost laughed. "You know this is how rumors start." Adrian glanced back inside. "Elena, I believe the rumors started several hours ago." For the first time that day, I laughed for real. On the terrace, away from the careful smiles and questions, the night had enough space for me to breathe. Lake Michigan stretched beyond the glass railing, dark and endless, carrying the reflections of the city like broken gold. Adrian stood beside me without crowding me, his jacket around my shoulders, as if even then he was making sure I had room to choose. I kept looking at the water because looking directly at him felt intimate. "You saved me in there," I said. Adrian shook his head. "No, I gave you an option. You saved yourself by taking it." I wanted to argue, but the truth settled deeper than gratitude. He had not dragged me down that aisle. He had not told me what bravery should look like. He had simply opened a door and waited to see whether I wanted to walk through it. Still, there was something unfinished in his face, something older than the wedding. So I asked why he had really done it. "And do not tell me again that nobody deserves to stand alone," I said. "That was beautiful, but I want the truth." For a long moment, Adrian looked out over the lake. Then he said, "5 years ago, you walked into my conference room with a portfolio too strong for the position you were applying for. You were nervous, but your work was not. One of my senior designers challenged your hotel lobby concept, and you corrected him so politely it took him 10 seconds to realize he had lost. I hired you before you reached the elevator." I remembered that interview. I remembered thinking he had seen the work before he saw the resume gaps, the lack of connections, the borrowed blazer. Adrian turned toward me and said, "I admired you first. Respect was safe, love was not." My throat tightened. He explained that admiration had become something deeper, but I had been engaged, and he had been my boss, so he buried it where it could not touch my career. Tomorrow he would remove himself from my direct reporting structure. If I stayed at Vale and Hart, I would report to another partner. If I left, he would write the strongest recommendation he could. "Your future cannot depend on whether you ever choose me," he said. Julian had made love feel like negotiation. Adrian made it feel like freedom. I did not tell him I loved him. I only said, "I do not know what I feel yet, but I know I felt safer with you in 20 minutes than I felt with Julian in 2 years." My phone lit up. Julian was calling. I turned it face down. Not tonight. 17 days passed before Julian found the courage to face me. I did not answer his calls. I did not read the long messages he sent through cousins, and I did not let anyone near my peace. By then, the symbolic ceremony had become a legend in Chicago's design circles. No one knew every detail, but everyone knew enough. Julian Westcott had vanished. Adrian Vale had stood beside the bride, and Elena Marlowe had not fallen apart. During those 17 days, Adrian and I moved carefully. Not like people trying to turn shock into romance, but like adults who understood that every choice had to be clean. He met with HR and removed himself from my reporting structure. I met with an attorney because I refused to let anyone call my decisions reckless later. We talked for hours, sometimes about the wedding, sometimes about nothing at all. And the strangest part was how peaceful it felt to be near someone who did not need my confusion to benefit him. When I finally married Adrian in a small civil ceremony with my parents Tessa and Father Daniel as witnesses, it did not feel like revenge. It felt like choosing the person who had protected my right to choose. Julian appeared at my apartment that evening with white roses and the exhausted confidence of a man who thought charm could still unlock a door he had burned down. He looked tired, but still expensive, still polished enough to believe presentation could soften betrayal. "I made a mistake," he said. "No, Julian," I answered. "A mistake is forgetting your cufflinks. You boarded a private jet after telling me you loved me." His excuses came in layers. He panicked. His mother pressured him. The resort vote was too important. He felt trapped. Sienna listened when I made him feel judged. He had planned to explain once everything calmed down. I asked, "Were you going to explain before or after I became the unstable bride in your mother's version?" For the first time, his face lost its script. Then he turned on Adrian, because men like Julian hate accountability but understand jealousy. He said Adrian had been waiting for his chance. He said I humiliated him by letting my boss take his place. I told him Adrian had not taken anything. "You abandoned the place, Julian. He stood where your cowardice left a hole." I reminded him the ceremony had been symbolic. Father Daniel had confirmed it, and nothing dishonest happened until he left the city and let his mother call my father. Then he noticed my new ring. When I told him Adrian and I were legally married, he stared like I had stolen something from him. "You married him to punish me?" "No," I said. "I stopped making choices around you. That feels like punishment because you thought my life would wait." He asked what I wanted. I said, "Tell your family to stop lying about me and I will let the truth stay private." Julian's mouth tightened. "My mother will never let you control the narrative." Then, I said, "She should have been more careful with the truth." He left angry. That night, Tessa sent me a link. The headline read, "Westcott family source claims bride's emotional instability led to wedding collapse." By morning, Vivian's version of my wedding was no longer a whisper. It was an article on a luxury hospitality blog, polished enough to look compassionate and cruel enough to do exactly what she intended. According to a Westcott family source, Julian had not abandoned me. He had postponed the wedding after serious emotional concerns became impossible to ignore. The family, the statement claimed, had tried to handle the matter privately, but my behavior had become erratic, and Adrian's sudden involvement raised questions about whether my heart had already been somewhere else before the ceremony. It ended with one sentence so elegant it made me sick. "We wish Elena healing and privacy during this difficult time." Privacy, from the woman who had turned my humiliation into strategy. By noon, the story had spread beyond people who knew us. A gossip account posted, "Runaway groom or runaway bride narrative." Commenters began doing what strangers do when a woman is publicly hurt. They filled the silence with theories that protected the man. Maybe I had cheated. Maybe Adrian had been waiting. Maybe Julian had escaped something darker. 2 clients paused their projects with me. One hotel developer emailed my assistant asking whether my personal instability would affect the renovation schedule. That was when I understood Vivian did not only want to save Julian. She wanted to make me unemployable in the same rooms where her family needed to look powerful. I did not break when Julian left me. I broke when his family turned my pain into evidence against me. I told Tessa, I could survive being abandoned. I could not survive being rewritten. Tessa called Lena Pierce before I could talk myself out of it. Lena was a reputation and defamation attorney with a voice calm. It made panic feel childish. She reviewed everything we had, then said, You do not need to be louder than Julian Westcott. You need to be cleaner. No rants, no emotional posts, no threats. We would build a record, so we did. The groomsman text, proving Julian left after midnight. Flight information showing the Westcott Company jet went to Aspen. A photo of Julian and Sienna boarding. Vivian's blocked number call log to my father. Maribel's full timeline of ceremony delays. Venue notes showing Westcott relatives slipping out the side entrance. Screenshots of early guest posts. Staff statements saying Westcott guests had mentioned my supposed breakdown before I had spoken publicly to anyone. Father Daniel's written confirmation that the ceremony was symbolic. HR documentation showing Adrian had removed himself from my reporting structure before any legal marriage. Then Sienna Rhodes contacted Lena. She wanted protection before speaking because Julian had lied to her too. He told her the wedding was basically canceled already. He said I was too fragile to accept it. He said Vivian would handle the bride situation. Sienna had texts, hotel receipts, and one voice note where Julian called me the bride problem. Lena asked if I wanted to proceed. I thought about every instinct I had to protect Julian, then said, I gave them a chance to stop lying. They chose crazy. Now they get accurate. At 8:57 the next morning, Julian texted, if you do this, you destroy my family. I replied, no, I stop letting your family destroy me. At 9 a.m., Lena Pierce released the statement, and the first thing I noticed was how calm it looked. There were no insults, no dramatic accusations, no desperate paragraphs asking people to believe me. It was a timeline, clean enough to make Vivian's polished lie look theatrical. Julian Westcott left Chicago on the Westcott Company jet after midnight. He traveled to Aspen with Sienna Rhodes. His family knew before the ceremony. I was not informed. Vivian called my father from a blocked number. Several Westcott relatives left the venue before the ceremony began. Westcott representatives described me as emotionally unstable before I had spoken publicly to anyone. The ceremony with Adrian Vale was symbolic, not legally binding, and verified by Father Daniel's statement. For a minute, nothing happened. Then everything happened at once. Sienna posted her own statement 23 minutes later. She wrote that Julian had misled her too, that he had told her the wedding was over, and that I was too fragile to accept it. She shared screenshots, enough to prove the pattern without turning it into gossip. One message from Julian said, once the bride situation is cleaned up, we can breathe. Another said, my mother will handle the optics. That phrase, bride situation, became the part people could not stop repeating because it told the story in two ugly words. I had not been a woman he betrayed. I had been a problem his family planned to manage. By noon, the internet had turned. People who had questioned me started deleting comments. Posts appeared faster than I could read them. She was not unstable. She was ambushed. They abandoned her, then tried to diagnose her. The empty chairs were not an accident. They were evidence. Vivian Westcott tried to PR spin a woman's humiliation. Then something larger happened. Women began sharing stories, not about weddings, but about being called dramatic after men betrayed them, unstable after they reacted, difficult after they stopped protecting people who hurt them. The story stopped belonging only to me. The business consequences came next. The Westcott Resort expansion vote was postponed. A wellness brand suspended its partnership. A private club paused a renovation contract. A board member resigned without mentioning my name, which somehow mentioned it louder. Former employees began posting about how the Westcotts managed reputation by blaming lower-status women, assistants, vendors, girlfriends, anyone easier to damage than a son. Investors started asking why a company jet had been used for a personal escape before a public family event. Julian was removed from his development role. Vivian stepped down from public-facing leadership. The family announced internal restructuring, but everyone understood. That evening, Julian sent one final message. You ruined me. I stared at it for a long time. Not because I missed him, but because I was looking at the exact shape of his delusion. Then I wrote, "No, you left. Your mother lied. Sienna kept receipts. I told the truth. You are confusing consequences with cruelty." Then I blocked him. I thought revenge would feel loud. I thought it would feel like fire, like satisfaction sharp enough to burn through grief. Instead, I sat by my apartment window and felt something quiet leave my body. No one was waiting for me to explain anymore. The truth was standing on its own. I had finally put down something heavy that was never mine to carry. When Adrian found me there, he did not say, "I told you so," or "Now it is over." He only asked, "What do you need?" For the first time, I knew. Something that belongs to me. After that night by the window, I knew the next thing I built had to be mine. Not Adrian's, not Julian's, not something people could explain away as a reward for surviving scandal. So I left Veil and Heart Interiors. Adrian did not ask me to stay, and he did not pretend my leaving hurt him less than it did. He simply wrote the strongest recommendation letter I had ever seen, then stepped back. He did not invest. He did not ask for ownership. He understood I needed one door with my name on it that no one could say he had opened for me. 3 months later, Marlowe Room Studio existed above a quiet bookstore far from the glass towers where I used to design lobbies. My new work was smaller, but it felt truer. I designed a one-bedroom apartment for a single mother who cried when I showed her how to make space for her daughter's art supplies. I helped a family rebuild after a kitchen fire. I planned a reading room for a community center and consulted on a shelter for women who needed bedrooms that felt safe instead of temporary. I helped a retired couple downsize after 40 years in the same house. For the first time, I was not designing rooms to impress strangers. I was designing places where people could exhale. My family helped me make it real. My father built my first studio desk from reclaimed walnut, the same kind of wood as the wedding arch. And when he ran his hand across the surface, neither of us mentioned that day. We did not have to. My mother arrived on opening morning with soup, flowers, and red eyes, and when she saw Marlowe Room Studio painted on the door, she covered her mouth like my name had become proof I was still here. Tessa hung the sign slightly crooked, stepped back, and said it gave the place character. I laughed, and this time the laugh was not broken. Adrian and I did not become perfect because we had survived something dramatic. We learned each other slowly, outside crisis. He learned that I take my coffee with oat milk but no sugar, and that I get quiet when I am overwhelmed, not angry. I learned he cannot sleep during thunderstorms, that he keeps his father's old watch in a drawer, and that grief sits in him politely until someone notices. We built something that did not need applause, witnesses, or proof. 1 year later, we held a small vow renewal at a lake house in Wisconsin. No press, no luxury investors, no empty rows, no Westcotts. My father built a smaller arch and carved one sentence underneath it: "Choose what chooses you." I wore a simple ivory dress. Adrian wore his father's ring again. This time, every word was legal, quiet, and ours. The Westcotts did not vanish, but they dimmed. Julian was sent to manage a failing mountain lodge far from Chicago. Vivian rarely appeared publicly. 2 spa properties were sold to stabilize debt, and their name no longer opened every door. That was what hurt them most, not poverty, not shame, but losing control. Sienna rebuilt her platform away from luxury performance and began speaking about powerful men who tell every woman a different version of the truth. We never became friends, but I stopped seeing her as the villain. The villain had always been the man who lied to both of us and the family that tried to make one woman carry the blame. Julian never apologized. Vivian never did either. Eventually, I understood waiting for an apology was still a way of staying tied to them. Closure came when their refusal no longer controlled my peace. For a long time, I thought that wedding day was the day I was abandoned. Now I know it was the day I was redirected. If you have ever been left by someone who expected your silence to protect their image, I need you to hear me clearly. Being abandoned does not mean you were not enough. Sometimes people leave in the cruelest way because they are counting on your shame to do the work for them. They expect you to hide, to make excuses, to explain their absence gently so their reputation survives what their character did not. Julian did not leave me because I was unworthy. He left because he was a coward who wanted freedom without accountability. Vivian did not lie because I was unstable. She lied because the truth threatened the Westcott name, and people like that will always call your pain dramatic when your honesty becomes inconvenient. For a long time, I thought the empty chairs were proof that I had been rejected. Now I understand they were proof that the wrong people had removed themselves from my future. That wedding day was not the end of my life. It was the end of my audition for people who never deserved the performance. I had spent so long trying to be graceful, reasonable, polished, and easy to defend that I almost forgot grace should never require self-erasure. The revenge was not Adrian. It was not marrying someone better. It was not the Westcotts losing deals or influence. The revenge was the truth. The revenge was every receipt saying what my voice had been too shocked to say in that bridal suite. Sometimes the door that closes is not rejection. Sometimes it is protection. Sometimes the person who leaves you in front of everyone accidentally gives you the clearest view of who was never supposed to stand beside you. And sometimes the people who call you unstable are only angry because you stopped holding their lies steady. I did not win because another man chose me. I won because I chose myself. I stopped begging them to admit I mattered, and I stopped confusing their silence with my failure. Julian thought the empty chairs would be the story. He was wrong. The story was that I kept walking. So tell me, if you were standing in your wedding dress with 200 people waiting and the groom gone, would you walk down that aisle with someone honorable beside you, or would you leave and let the empty chairs speak for themselves?